as I was putting this together, I realized that this isn't a talk about recovery and sobriety, but it's where my art journey starts. So last week, which is great timing, on the 13th of March, I had 19 years of recovery. Thanks. And at the time, I woke up in the middle of the night on March 13th, 19 years ago. I was working at Willamette at the Hatfield Library, and I see a couple of library people that are here. And I woke my husband up and said, I need help. And by 1 o'clock the next day, I was in a 28-day residential treatment program. It was fantastic. It was hard work, but I came out saying everybody should have the opportunity to go do 28 days away where you're writing and you're in groups and you're, really just taking a look at, who you are. And so that was a really big turning point. About 2 years or so in recovery, I was looking back and reflecting on what that experience was like, and I decided that I wanted to become a drug and alcohol counselor because it had so profoundly changed my life. So I had my undergraduate degree in history already, so I went to Schmecketa, and they had a one-year program that was a post-baccalaureate that allowed you to get all the hours, and to become the first level counselor, I think you needed like 1,000 hours of supervised practicum and 150 hours of education. So I was able to get that. I got a job at Serenity Lane and worked there for a number of years doing intensive outpatient groups, family groups. I even did a little stint doing Dewey groups, driving under the influence. And it was really great, but one of the things I realized is that people in treatment are really sick, which I knew, but I was kind of about 5 years into my recovery, and I'd been working there, I realized that I was kind of looking for something more. So there was this book that I had bought many years ago, and I would do a few chapters, I'd put it aside. And it's called The Artist's Way, and it's by Julia Cameron. And maybe you've heard of it, but it's basically 12 chapters, and it's a book on creative recovery. And I didn't know it at the time, but Julia Cameron, who has 30-some years now, was in recovery, and a lot of the language is very much, AA and recovery-oriented. So anyway, I tried to do it on my own and never really got very far. And so I was on a writing listserv and read about a woman in Portland who was offering what she called were creative clusters. And that was, you would read a chapter, you would write morning pages, which is basically journal writing in the morning, go on an artist date, and then there were exercises. Well, every week I drove up to Portland in a small group. We talked about all these things we'd done during the week, and we did an art project. And one time it was clay, one time it was painting with our eyes closed to music. It was all these things, and it was like, what is this? This stuff is great. And I'd taken an art class in high school, but it's just not anything. We had kids, and I decorated the house and worked in the yard and liked to cook. So there was always that creative piece, but this was like, wow. So I did this whole class, and then I thought, man, I would love to offer something like this in Salem. So let me get this set up. So I asked the person that I had taken this whole 12-week course, and I said, would you mind if I did something similar in Salem? And she said, go forward, do it, it's great. So I started offering these 12-week sessions. It was limited to 6 people. It turned out it was always women that signed up. And usually the women were women that were, for the most part, kind of finishing careers or toward the end of their careers, and they were kind of saying, what's next? The kids had been raised, ready to move on. So I would do, twice a year, I would do these 12-week sessions where people would come to my house. We would kind of do the same thing, talk about the artist's way, talk about art, talk about, and it wasn't about the art per se, it was more about the internal stuff. It was a great fit for the counseling skills that I had learned, but to be able to do it in creative ways. So about this time, so I'm offering these groups. I don't have a formal art education. You know, my training was history, and then it was in counseling. So I started taking every art class I could find, whether it was workshops, whether it was classes, and I just took everything I could and kind of started, you know, early on I didn't try and focus. I just took a class. So one of the classes that was pretty instrumental early on was called sand painting, and it was offered by Judy Vogeland at Sitka Center for Art and Ecology. I don't know if I know some of you have taken classes there. They have writing and art classes and music classes. It's on the Oregon coast at Cascade Head. And I took this class 2 years in a row. Judy Vogeland had been a high school teacher. She was a phenomenal teacher, just phenomenal, just great. And we made our own canvases. We would go down to Nescoin. We would take these big canvas boards and we would throw them in the river and wash the sand off, and then we'd throw sand, and then when we got a design we liked, we would spray it with glue and then sit around and wait for the glue and the sand to dry, lug them back to Sitka, and the rest of the week we would paint them. So you're going to see stripes throughout my whole, that never went away, but this was a really early piece that I did. So this is sand as the substrate, and then acrylic paints. This was another one I did that hung in our bathroom for a long time, and again, it's sand that gives it the texture and then washes of acrylic. So that was one class that was pretty crucial. I then was taking some classes using found objects, and several people that are here have been to my house and they've been to my basement. I'll show you a couple pictures toward the end. I am a collector, and the junkier, the rustier, the more worn out it is, the better it is. So I went through, and I still make these, maybe every other year I'll dig out all my metal cans. My husband is here. He's the one that flattens those things for me. Anything I can't figure out how to beat into submission, I give it to him and say, can you get this rivet out? Can you cut this out? And so I made these birds, which I still sell at a gallery in Portland. So this is a whole group of them. I've only included a couple pictures of the actual birds, but it's all found, it's old tin cans cut up. Some people are horrified because some of them are pretty cool, but usually I find them for pretty cheap in junk piles, and they're going to the landfill. So I feel like I'm giving a lot of my assemblage art, I feel like I'm giving new life to. And when I start tearing up books later, you're really gonna gasp. But believe me, I think it's because I'm giving them a new life. And then this was one, and this is one I kept. I have this hanging at home for some reason. I just like that little holster piece from a kid's gun set. So the other thing that I do with the junk that I collect, and my basement is filled with it, is I make what's called curious elements. So I take old wood, like baseboards that's been ripped out of a house. Again, my husband will cut it up for me. I sand it, I paint it, I put a layer of plaster on it, stain it again. I do all this stuff in the basement, and then I take the found objects and make little vignettes on each of the boards. You know, people have fun looking at these things. It's like, oh, I remember, you know, I had a you know, skate key, or you recognize various bits and pieces that I use. This was another one I'll talk about, a show I had last fall, and these were the pieces in that show. So it kind of gives me a reason to junk, because I can say, but it's for art, it's art supplies. And then these are just a few close-ups, kind of just showing a little bit more of the detail. So there was a period, again, this was all during, some of these things I've continued to do. Some things have kind of faded away. I had a period where I was like, maybe I should try painting some faces. Well, I've never been a realistic kind of painter, so I started playing around painting faces. Again, another theme I have is just the use of color. So I painted these faces called Fearless Faces, and I did them on old boards, again, reclaimed wood, and then I did a series of them in an old atlas that I glued pages together and painted. All the board ones have been sold, but I still have the atlas. And I have made cards out of these because there's just like a little gang of convicts, especially if you put them in a little row, they just are. So I did collage early on, where I would use acrylic paint and handmade papers, and that eventually would morph. This was acrylic on paper. This is one with some little pieces of paper, found paper. I started using more ephemera in my art. That will show up later. So there's certain themes that I started early on. Some faded away, some things kind of just morphed and changed as my sensibilities as an artist changed. So I have a couple points along in what I'm sharing today that were like instrumental in who I am now as an artist. The Artist's Way was one. The next big one was when I signed up for a class at OCAC, Oregon College of Art and Craft in Portland. Sadly, it just announced that after this current term graduates, they're closing the school, and I'm so sad about that. I love that school. So I took this class with a woman named Pat Wheeler, and I took her class in 2010, 11, 12, and 13. The first couple years, I learned a ton. The next 2 years, I only went because I wanted to be with her for a week, to get to spend a week on the campus and be with this woman. She's from Maine, and the process was we worked on these panels, which you can see a stack here. They're cradled panels, and cradled panels are wood boards, and they have sides that are also wood. And the two paintings that I have on this table are demonstrate what a cradled panel is. One of the fun things is that you not only get to paint on the front, but you have those four sides. And so it's like having four little mini canvases. So we would paint these boards, and with acrylic, we would put a layer of plaster, joint compound from the hardware store. It's like $9 a bucket. And then on the show cards, we write limestone clay. So it sounds very fancy, but it's just from Lowe's for $9. But it creates instant texture. It's water soluble, so you can go into it, you can carve, you can do transfers on it. So we put the layer. Here, this is one of the years. You can kind of tell by my hair maybe what year it is. But this was one of the years at OCAC. These were the big boards we worked on. Then we would go outside and wear a mask and sand them. And then we would come in, and I used them often to process. I could write things that I didn't want to talk about. I didn't necessarily want the art to be about, but if I was going through something tough, no matter what it is, I could write it on there, and then I knew it was going to get covered with paint. And I still do that. I still will go in. And the other beauty, the thing about it is you can do that writing, you can do that painting, you can then add more plaster. So it's just this great process of back and forth, layering, subtracting, digging in, paint seeping in. And then 2 years ago, Pat had a class in Portland for about 10 of us who had taken her class multiple times and had taken her process and gone forth and done something different with it in our own way. So this was a picture from that class, again, still sanding, and So, and I'll say a little bit more about that. One great thing, it wasn't a great thing, Pat couldn't make it last year. She comes every year and she would teach at OCAC and at Sitka, and she was having some health problems, and she asked me to fill in for her classes for her. And that was like the highest honor that, because her classes were so revered, and she was such this, I mean, again, a lot of people took her because of who she was. So, that was a great honor. And these are just a couple of the pieces that I made one of the years. Again, you can see the texture. So that's plaster that causes that texture, those circles. And you can see there's some numbers across the top. And same with this was some handmade paper that had little holes. One of the things about using too much of a stencil thing is people that are in the field can kind of say, oh, I recognize that. So it's fun to use something a little more obscure, using your knife to kind of make it so you can't quite tell what it is, make it a little more organic. So my first show that I had, I was invited to, in 2012, to have a show at Lunaria Gallery in Silverton. So I did a wall of my curious elements. Again, these backgrounds were made with the plaster and all these different found objects. And then I had a couple walls of paintings. So this was the one wall with paintings. And that was it was, it was really an honor just to be asked to have that first show. So it was after that, what year? Same year. So I had that show. And then I took another class at Sitka, and this is another one of those pivotal moments. So I had the Artist's Way, I had Pat Wheeler and plaster, and then I discovered oil and cold wax. And the class was a week long at Sitka, and Alan Cox, he was a Tennessee artist that came out and taught this class. And oh my goodness, sometimes you just, I know there's a lot of musicians here. You hear some music or you discover an instrument or something and you just are like, oh, where's this been? And this was that moment. It was just, and I'll say just a quick word about cold wax. Cold wax, I buy by the gallon. You can buy it in a small little thing or you can buy it by the gallon. It's beeswax. It's mixed with mineral spirits. When you open the gallon, it's a metal can. It looks just like shortening, like you would, use. I haven't had shortening in the house for years, but I know growing up we did. And it's basically the same consistency and the same color. So it's very soft and buttery. And that is then mixed with oil paint, 50-50, give or take. It's not an absolute. I kind of slop it out and then slop it out and then mix it together. The other great thing about this material is I use putty knives. So I used to not look forward to going to the hardware store, and now it's like an art store. Getting palette knives, the big putty knives, and all those, the wall spackle things, and the tape that I don't even know the names of them all, but it's where a lot of my art tools are from. So, this was one of the pieces I created in that class. So here's the thing. Supply list for an art class. Tells you what colors of paint to bring, tells you what kind of putty knives, tells you cold wax. And it said bring 3 16-by-20 panels, cradled panels, again, these panels, prepped, gessoed, sanded 3 times. I followed that supply list. I brought my 3 panels. I was staying at, I don't know where Hazel's sitting. Hazel had a pole house across the street from Sitka where I stayed in her cabin. My husband dropped me off for the week. I had groceries, art supplies, a coffee maker, and my 3 panels. So I go to class, and one of the things about oil and cold wax, the cold wax helps speed up the drying of the oil for anybody here that paints with oil paints. The mineral spirits kind of help evaporate. So you can work on a piece, if you're not working too thick, in the morning and come back to it in the afternoon. There's lots of techniques that you can use, whether it's wet, tacky, or dry. So, I always in my class last year, it's like bring lots of boards, and when I'm working in my studio right now, I think I have 18 pieces. And I'll show you a picture of my studio. Some are small, some are big. I can go from one to the next at any time. I have 3 panels, no car, and there's not even an art supply store in Lincoln City other than the stationery store where sometimes they might have, I don't know what. So I go back and I see that everybody else has taken the class multiple times. They brought more panels. They're all prepared. So I'm thinking, what am I going to do? So this was just another piece that I did do on the 3 panels. So Hazel, on her little porch, had a wood pile for their wood stove. And there was a bunch of wood there that I thought, oh, I wonder if that would work. It's not seasoned. I mean, there's nothing about it that's archival. But I go back that night and I pull a bunch of, this is the size. This was the way it was cut. And I pull about 10 of those pieces of wood out. I had brought plaster. I'm a huge multitasker. If I'm painting during the day, I was probably doing something in the evening for something else. So I had my bucket of plaster. So because it was so rough and I, wasn't going to be able to seal it, I put a layer of plaster on it. So I took those 10 panels and I had 10 little substrates to be able to do art on. I still have all of them in my basement. A couple of them have cracked right down the middle, but I've just kept them, and I keep this one in my studio because it really just reminds me, and I wrote, I find, we can just be creative, and these are the ones that have withstood, are these little pieces. And I don't even know if I ever told you that, Hazel, about using your wood. You probably went the next time and was like, I thought I had more wood. So it was after that I had been at Gardino Gallery. It's in Portland on Northeast 30th in Alberta. I'd been in many group shows. Well, not many, this was still pretty early, but I'd been in group shows, and I'd often heard the way you kind of get into a gallery is, you participate in ways that you can. So I'd been in group shows, and Donna, every summer, in August, she has people come in and pitch their shows if they want to do a show. And I thought, I'm going to pitch a show in plaster, oil, and cold wax. Because that was the other piece. When I did this, I had learned the plaster. I was learning the cold wax. It was when I put the cold oil and cold wax over the plaster that was the turning point, that I was doing something that I didn't know of anybody else that was doing at that point. So I decided I'm going to say I'd like to do this show. It'll be abstract work. It'll be oil and cold wax over plaster. So I go in, show Donna some examples. I love Donna, I have a great relationship with her, and I can remember her, and she kind of, that one's nice, this one's just not working for me, and again, these are just examples, so it's like, okay, I can, it's all right, swallow, and I got the show. She lets you know in the fall, so I had a show the next February. So this was one of the show cards, the online one, and my show was called Beneath the Surface, Searching for Memory. And it was 2 walls on the counters and then a whole nother wall. And so, and there's Donna on the left. And it was really exciting because it was like, this is a real gallery. And the thing that this show was about, that was in the pieces and in the title, but I did not put in my artist statement, is my dad had Alzheimer's, and he had early dementia. At this point, it was still fairly early, but the signs were there. So all of my pieces, I would do that writing on the boards about my dad, and then I would cover it all up. The searching for memory was because he said funny things sometimes. So some of my titles of my pieces were the things he had said, which was poignant for me. But I thought nobody's going to want to necessary, who's going to buy a piece of art when it's about somebody's dad who's got Alzheimer's? So it was my knowledge, and it really fueled the show for me in a really special way. And then I took my dad up to see the show. Now, he didn't have any concept of the art, but the window I filled the whole bottom layer with family black and white photos, and that triggered memories for him. So he could look at those and see his brothers and his mom and his dad, and it was a really meaningful time when he was still lucid enough, that he could go out and we could do something like that. So these are some of the pieces from that show. One of the things that I have always loved and continue to play around with is the intersections, those lines where one color meets another color, where how to create texture and energy, how to bring, all of those things together. So most of these particular ones are 8 by 8, so I really like the little size. I think it makes it affordable for people to be able to buy art. And I know our house is so full of art, although we always say there's always room. I always can find a place to put something that's 8 by 8 or tall and thin. This one was a bigger piece. It sold. Most of these have all sold, but this one, if during the break, if you're not in a hurry to get to lunch, I brought some of my journals, my art journals that I write in and put ideas and all kinds of things. But my art is in a few books, and this particular piece was in a book on oil and cold wax done by a Portland artist, Serena Barton. So you'll see the pages open to that. This is one I still love color. Again, there's more, the intersections. Again, how interesting can I make where the top and the bottom meet. A lot of my boards I use niches where they're little boxes, and I will tell you, when I do these, sometimes I labor over what goes in there as much as I do the painting. It's such a precious spot. So these are all edges. These are panels where I've done paintings, and these are just those side cradles that I mentioned, that you have these little, on each side, you then have little canvases. I've done some boards where I leave the wood natural and just varnish it, but I love walking into a room and you look down the wall and you see that little splash of color. I just think that's so exciting. Here's another one. This one is in another book. There's a woman named Rebecca Crowell and her and another artist, Jerry McLaughlin, and they're kind of the gurus of oil and cold wax, and they contacted me, so I have two of my niche, people, whichever, in that book, and it's, I also have a copy. You can take a look there. So Donna Gardino allows an artist to have a show every 2 years at her gallery. So my first show was in, 2013. So in 2015, went in August, took a couple pieces, or maybe I don't even know if I did. I just said, hey, I'd like to have a show. I probably sent her an email at that point and said I'd like to have a show, and she said okay. And so this show was in 2015, and my theme for this one was Evoke. And I find that if my paintings have a theme, I'm able to really put that passion and energy into it, other than just creating colorful paintings, which are fun sometimes to work intuitively, but I really need to have something fueling what I'm doing. So, and this one's a little bit harder to explain, so I'm just gonna read what my artist statement was. Dana Collins' new abstract series, titled Evoke, is inspired by topics and themes passionate to Dana and reflect her emotional responses. Through layers of plaster, oil, and cold wax and markings, Dana brings her energetic and visceral reactions to such themes as aging, addictions, secrets, joy, environmental issues, health, and friendship. Buried beneath the surfaces are words or thoughts written boldly across the painted plaster, then covered with layers of oil and cold wax. Art is a powerful therapist. Dana worked in a range of sizes, varying from 8 by 8 inches to 36 by 48, letting the magnitude of the theme dictate what size board she used. Dana has chosen not to identify her themes, but evoke is intended to draw out or produce personal emotional responses from those who view this series. So I remember on the evening of the opening reception, these are the boards for that show. This is the first layer, and then this is one of the pieces in the show. But there was a piece in that show that a couple bought. And they had read my artist statement, so they didn't know what the theme was of the one they bought. I think they were a little worried it was maybe addictions or aging or something, negative. And so, and the one they had bought I knew was joy. And I had written what the theme was upside down on the back underneath. And I just assured them, in fact, I think I told them, I said, the theme for yours is joy. So they were a little bit relieved. They'd already paid for it to find out. This one that I'm working on, this was the biggest size that the first time I had worked on one that big. And this particular one hangs in our house. It hung in my husband's office until he closed down his office. And this one is on addiction. This one was my journey. And it was kind of that darkness down at the bottom. It's very dark. And then it's that coming up and, into the light. And the title of this is Singed by Fire and Light. So, and I will, just a word about, and I have 10 minutes to get through the rest of this. I think I'm talking too much. I title my paintings usually by lines of poetry. I'll read poetry, or if I'm reading a wonderfully book, a fiction even, where someone's just really knows how to put those words together, I'll sit with, when I'm reading, I'll have a pen and paper, and I'll just take 4 or 5 words of lines, and I just keep lists of these. And then when I go to title my paintings, I look through these lists and they just kind of jump out. So this, I don't remember what this one was from, but so then this was the show, and there it was hanging. And that was the reception. And the one over to the left is the joy one that you can't see. And these were just a couple of the pieces that was on the show card. And then I had, so then 2 years later, I thought, I'm not going to ask for a show. I'm going to just take this year off, catch my breath. I get an email from Donna, and she said, my computer's been acting up, and I have an email here that you had written about a show. Well, I had not. I didn't want to lie to Donna, but she was going to give me a show. So I wrote back and said, well, I don't remember, but sure, I'd love to. So I felt like, I kind of wasn't saying I didn't send it, but I didn't say I did. So this show was called Waterlines, and that again, I grew up on the river. My parents had a ski boat. We spent hours in Portland on the Columbia. I love the water. We have a boat. One time I was floating in the water and I looked at the water line of our boat, and it was, all that oxidation, and it was turquoise and red and orange. It was like, oh, look at that's a painting. So that was the inspiration for this show. Again, lots of paintings, varying sizes. Couple close-ups. Again, you can see the lines and the marks. That one was on the show card. This one is here. If you come down during the break, feel free to touch them, because the oil and cold wax is just a real luminosity, and they're really fun. You buff them with a t-shirt when they're dry, and you can kind of reignite that, the sheen on them. So I'm going to go kind of quickly through these, just because I still have a bit to go. And these are all just various oil and cold wax, not necessarily associated with a show, just to show, you can see the texture of that plaster. The oil paint with the cold wax, you can create texture with that as well. You can build up, scrape back, dig in, add more layers on all of these. If you have bright colors underneath, you put darker colors on top, and you scratch through it with whatever, a wood awl or a pencil. You can see that orange line, those orange lines coming through. This one had lots of hot pinks, put the grays and the taupes on top, and yet the scratches going into it reveal what's underneath. So I did an artist in residence 2 years ago at Salem Art Association. I had proposed, one of my junk collecting things is I collect black and white photos of people I don't know. Do you know how many people throw out photo albums and photos of their family, or when people, I don't know what my kids are gonna do with all of this. But so I propose doing collages using these black and white photos of strangers. So my theme was, what's your story, real or imagined? There's a few people here that took the workshop that I offered as part of my artist in residence. So I got to work there for a month, and I would go in and kind of keep regular hours, and I would, I experimented with these the ends of crates, brought a lot of my ephemera that I collect, and then started to build these. And these are like 8 by 10, 9 by 12. I did the backgrounds much like I do on boards. It was paint and plaster and words and lots of layers. So here's layering it using putty and palette knives. Again, creating interest and then covering it up with, this is the beginning of some of the book parts. There's a metal notary seal. Then I started using bigger pictures, not just photographs. I basically tried to make up a story about this person who I had no idea who it was. I created it using scraps and notes and ripped apart. We cut up I'll show you a picture. This was a crazy quilt someone gave me. For quilters, this is a horrifying scene to see this quilt being cut up. But it was wholly, and not in the biblical sense, it was holes were throughout it, and it made the best little scraps because all that stitching, oh my gosh, I still have chunks of that. And so anyway, we spent a whole day, and everybody made a whole series of their own little collages. My next evolution, I say, because I always like this collecting, junking, repurposing, is I started doing the same thing to books, taking old books that I can tell you, I went to the YMC book sale, and it required a hand cart and more than one trip to get them to the car because they were very cheap. I look for the ones that are really old, that have those spines when you rip them, it's like that netting, and then I will sit in the basement and just rip books apart. I probably should be wearing a mask, I realized once when what I uncovered. I didn't tell my husband about that. So these are all book boards, book parts, every bit of it. I have a stack down here in cellophane that I haven't mounted yet. I did propose another show to Donna using the book collages. She was a little hesitant. She's looking through them. I have the framed one on the end there is an example of, some of them will be framed, and I took some up, and they were pretty muted palettes, and she was like, well, they're not very colorful. And then I started pulling some more out, and she goes, oh. So then I didn't know, and I got the email that she's taking a chance that I can pull this off. And so it'll be all these collages using everything from books. So this is another example. There's the stripes coming through on a book board. This is a stack, again, all parts of books. This might be the one that I brought. And there's one of the examples of how colorful, but you can see the bindings and I don't know, there's just some, it's my new favorite thing right now. And I even do some like this on the complete book where I've just pulled the guts out. I have so many stacks of book guts. So my idea is to put those in the window because I have that side of the gallery. I'm so excited because I love doing that window. So I'm going to stack up boxes and, all the insides of the books that I don't use. I had a show last fall with a good friend of mine. We've junked together for probably 10 years. We never had a show together. And we called it Scrounged Beauty. And again, I went back to doing my curious elements and then incorporated some of my book pieces. This was my obsession with pencils. I wanted to title this piece, All My Best Pencils, but I didn't. I called it Delightful Daydreams, and I was so excited. It didn't sell during the show, and I was so excited to bring it home. And then somebody that I had shared it on social media wrote and said she wanted to buy it. So it's now living somewhere in the Midwest. This is, some of you know Jim Hockenhull. He gave me a whole bag of all of his science fiction and pulp fiction paperbacks. So this piece is on reclaimed wood, and it's called Pulp Fiction. And so some of the titles are maybe you might recognize, you don't want to admit it, but the covers of these books are, I can't wait to figure out what to do with the covers. This is an assemblage piece. Again, I use my junk. This is nestled in a box. Some of it's on the creepier side. I collect doll heads at home. This was a bag of those little watercolor paint tins on reclaimed wood. Again, little frames. It's just such a fun thing to go in my basement and audition all of these pieces that I have down there. So I have a studio across the street at Mission Mill. It's my first Studio One. It's in the corner. Some of you have been. We have open studios quarterly. We have 11 artists. Upstairs, Jim Hockenhull is one of them. Bonnie Hull is there. I'm sure there's, several of the artists that we have. So this is my project for all things paper. My ephemera, my photographs, and now book parts. So those other things I kind of pushed underneath, and now it's where I store all those tubs are book parts by color. I'm very organized. When I'm working, I like to make a mess, but then I can't breathe if it just becomes too much. I see some artist studios where they're just wild, and it's like, oh, how great for them. I really like the look. I just can't work in it. This is my painting studio. This was taken last week. I'm working on pieces for a show and for a special event. My critique group is coming tonight to my house to look at what I've been working on and give me feedback. So I'm doing two scary things today, doing this, and then tonight I get to listen to them tell me what I need to do, and I have like 1 week to do whatever they might suggest. And as you can see, I've got lots of pieces in progress. Again, if I have paint mixed up, I always use it up. I'll go lay it on, and as I told my students always, it's just a layer. If you don't like it, you can always cover it up. So different views. It's a nice bright space. Obviously, I don't sit much. I just use it to store more paints. But and then next to it is our bathroom, and we have 2x4s, and it's where I dry big paintings. Obviously, we don't take baths. So this is one of the ones that I've been working on, and we'll see how it goes. Then this is the basement. I just thought I would share a picture. This is where I do the plaster work, and it's every one of these cupboards down here behind the doors are filled with bins and drawers and with stuff. Again, very neatly organized, but there's a lot of stuff. My friend Stephanie, she's a wood carver, and she'll send me a text. I need a number 5, I need a red cat collar, and I need a dog tag. And I will go shopping and lay it out and take a picture and said, which 5, is this red collar good, and which dog tag do you want? So I'm also a resource. So again, these are just various shots of, we have a 1926 house, so it's this kind of crazy thing. I just wanted to mention, because I'm here because of teaching. So I've taught at different places. I've taught in Portland, I've taught in San Diego. I will be teaching at Sitka again this year for my 3rd year. I love that space for anybody that's been there. These are pictures from my classes the last couple of years. I'm teaching there in August. It's just the best space, and it's big and bright. It's, like I said, at Cascade Head. So you're going to recognize a couple people that are here today that are in this picture, Deanna and Jinx. And this was just, these are just more pictures of that. And I thought this was such a cute one. So there was a group of 4 of them that all came together, and it was great. So it's an honor to be able to teach. And I usually only teach once a year, and 12:20, how's that? So. Sorry if I went a little too quick through some of those, but wanted to get through them all. So questions, comments?
Hi, Dana.
Hi, Lois.
So with the cold wax, so is that something you put on afterwards? Is it texture? How does that work? Because I think of wax as something that, I guess it's hot, but it's cold.
So
tell me about
hot
it.
wax is beeswax, and that's encaustic. You know, I mean, beeswax heated is encaustic, and that's painted on. Because cold wax is also beeswax, but it has mineral spirits, which you would not want, you know, to heat, because it would be flammable and not good. So they're 2 different processes, have a few different ingredients. The cold wax is like shortening, or like really creamy peanut butter. Same color as shortening. And mixed with the oil, it just becomes, and then you take a palette knife and you just lay it on like you're frosting a cake. And you can do it very thin. Again, the techniques are this long, as anybody that's taken the class. You can blot, scratch, dry, layer, but you basically lay it on like you're frosting a cake. You can brayer it on, you can palette knife it on, you can use like a squeegee, like those kind you can buy to clean out bowls when you're baking. Those are the best, because they just lay it right on, those little silicone scrapers. And I also say, if somebody says, well, can I do this? It's like, if you can think of it, try it, do it. It's just a layer. You can always cover it up if you don't like it. And the beauty with it is the layers, because there's no shortcut. You know, to get those colors that are going to pop through, it's just layers. It's just the more you add. I sometimes go over old paintings. My husband, it's really tough sometimes because he'll like something and I'll cover it up. I can tell how many layers a painting has sometimes by how heavy it is. So, you know, you can just keep going over it forever. Oh, right, somewhere. Who has the mic?
Oh,
You,
Priscilla.
okay.
Yes, hi, Priscilla. Very
Hi.
inspirational. Love seeing all your work. I'm wondering why you couldn't mix acrylic with wax.
They just don't play well together because acrylic is water-based
Okay.
and plasticky.
Okay.
I know some people that do it, but it is absolutely not recommended.
Okay.
And I don't know how long it would.
So I'll try it with oil. Thanks.
Yeah, yes, definitely. And again, this Rebecca Crowell book is the book I'd recommend to anybody that wants to learn about it. And somebody.
Hi, Dana.
Oh, hi,
Deanna.
Deanna.
I just loved hearing about your journey and just your process. Just absolutely touches my heart.
Thank you.
There is an artist, I wasn't going to say this, but because you just said that, there is an artist, and I don't know his name, but he's in Portland, and he does, in fact, use hot wax, or he uses wax, and then he paints acrylic on it, and then he blow torches it, and he does do it in layers, and that causes the acrylic to separate and do all kinds of amazing things. really abstract artist. I
Right.
wish I knew his name. If I think of
Not
it, I'll
Carl, is it?
email you, no.
Okay, okay.
But anyway, so he makes that work. The fact that they don't
Right.
work, he makes that work.
Right.
My question was, are you still, I mean, I'm just kind of curious about your future meanderings through the art world. Are you finding yourself going in any kind of new directions currently? How's
I'm
your
always
thought process?
experimenting. This pinkish, smaller journal down here is acrylic paintings that I set up for me to paint a painting a day in. And so I've experimented in it. And I've been photocopy the ones I like, and that was because I went through it so quick. I have those on the wall. So some of those are a little different composition. I've always done abstract landscapes. I'm always pushing and trying to do something different, and I've been trying to get away from the abstract landscapes. I kind of always find my way back, but I'm always pushing. So I know I'll continue doing the oil and cold wax. I just love it. The book collages, I love that, but who knows in a year? I just don't know. I mean, that's kind of the fun, exciting part of the journey, is just being open. And opportunities come, and I really have a hard time saying no. And that's what's exciting, is, you know, having the opportunity like this. So. Good answer. Yeah. It'll be on social media, whatever I do.
Thank you. This is Lucy down front. A quick question. The mineral spirits and the cold wax, are there fumes that you need to account for in ventilation?
Not like in caustic. In caustic, because you heat the wax, and, you know, it has Damar resin in it. Again, there's, you know, things. There is some odor. I mean, I keep a window open. It's not horrible. If someone were ultra sensitive, and I know some people that oil paints, they can't work with oil anymore because of the odors. You know, if someone were ultra sensitive, they would notice. I can kind of tell if the house is closed up and I go upstairs because my painting studio's upstairs. But for the most part, an open window, maybe a fan, it's pretty minimal. It's pretty minimal.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, Wayne here. Are you familiar with the shop called Cargo? It used to be in Pearl.
Oh, yes, yes.
I've seen old photographs in black and white sold there, along with anything else you can think of.
Right, all those Santos and all of, I bet the photos are a little less expensive than the Santos, though.
Yeah, and that's now
love
on
that
that's now on Yam Hill.
Yeah, yes, I've been to the new one. I love that store. Very inspiring.
Well, I could add, and this kind of goes back a bit, but maybe 50 years ago, my mother used to help with people's estate sales, and there would be photographs from 1880s, 1890s, and it would
Right.
just break her heart that the people would just say, just toss them.
Right,
And so she
right.
would bring them home, and she would give them to us in our Christmas stockings
Oh.
with the people who reminded her of us in our various characteristics.
I love
and
that.
I received a whole string of them with just little girls going, eh.
Boy, there's a lot of psychological. Do you still have them?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, that's so cool,
Yeah,
though.
they're on the hutch in my dining room.
Great thing. Yeah, I love that.
She would say, these people need relatives.
Oh, see? That's great. Yeah.
I have a quick question over here. How can we get in touch with you if we want to take a class in the oil and cold wax to learn the techniques and
Yes, I brought some business cards. They're down here, and they have my email and my phone number. I have a website. I'll be blogging about this, what I did today probably. I still do a blog, but send me an email. My class at Sitka filled in 3 days. I would love to offer another class in that. I just don't do a ton of teaching because it's a very, it takes a lot of energy, but give me your name and I'll let you know the next time I'm teaching. And again, Rebecca Crowell's book is great too. I call it the Bible of oil and cold wax, so.